What is good, all you cool cats and kittens? This is your Commissioner Tim with the Week 4 recap. Week 4 is officially in the books, now down to just 10 more regular games remaining in the season before the playoffs. And we finally got every team in our league with at least one win after a stout league-leading performance by Hafcho. But unlike Week 3, all 4 of our matchups were pretty much decided by end of Sunday night, or so we thought. Anyways, the 3 games of the 4 were pretty much decided after the Sunday morning games. Now, the upset victory happened after a bomb performance on Monday Night Football, where Brandon was able to have that upset victory over the Washington Fantasy Football team. That gives Commissioner Brandon not just a victory for Week 3, but a record of 2-2 in Week 3 to give him a total record of 9-7 through our young season so far. So for this week's recap video, I'm going to try a new format. Instead of highlighting players on each matchup, but rather highlighting fantasy notables in its own section, and then focusing on league standings and movements and maybe ramifications for each of the matchup recaps. Starting with the fantasy notable positives, I'll start with the fantasy leader of the week in Tyreek Hill. What an amazing performance, 40 plus points on fantasy in our half-point PPR format. And obviously he's had 2 sort of down, depressing weeks. People are certainly game planning to take touches away from Tyreek, but Kansas City's offense is elite as they come, and Tyreek is as elite as it comes when it comes to the receiver position. So it's great to see Tyreek really taking stride, and I think it's going to be more indicative of the high-level performance you can expect out of this true receiver one in our league going forward. I want to talk about Cordarrelle Patterson as potentially, it's only Week 4, but potentially, is Cordarrelle Patterson the waiver pickup of this season? Let me give you some quick stats on him. After Week 1, and it wasn't even a bad performance in Week 1 at 7.7 points that week, he has averaged over 20 points a week in 2, 3, and 4. And last week, obviously, just continued to go off on his bull run, scoring 3 receiving touchdowns and performed the league, getting a 32.1 point sort of performance outing. And you stick a player like this on Cup to Canada's roster, which is already within that contender tier, and man, does Cordarrelle Patterson move the needle for Yeez in potentially power rankings in that you'll see in the video coming out later today. I also want to mention another receiver, or I guess Cordarrelle Patterson isn't really a receiver, but certainly playing like it. I came into the season with doubts, just like a lot of people did on this receiver, and it's Deebo Samuel for me. We're Week 4, and I think we're now heading into sort of Week 5, and I think we certainly see enough of the patterns of every offense, every sort of lineups and situations to be able to make a call on how the true depth charts are positioned within every single one of these teams in the NFL. All the doubts and concern, I think Deebo Samuel is looking like a true wide receiver 1 for the Niners offense. And he's certainly performing at a high tier across the board when you consider him amongst his peers in the receiver category. And his performance, I thought, in Week 2 when he had that, or Week 1, Week 2 when he had that blow up sort of that performance, I was thinking it was just a little flash in the pan, but here we are in Week 4, and he's got 3 amazing performances so far in just 4 weeks. I think that's going to be potentially more things that we can expect out of this young receiver out of San Francisco. I also want to highlight another San Francisco player, Trey Lance. Obviously, he gets his first extended look with Jimmy Garoppolo being injured with what's reported to be just a calf potential strain or a slight injury. But regardless, he played half of a game and scored 20 points for that game. Obviously, he didn't look as great as he did in real life as maybe the the fantasy points indicates. But as we all know in fantasy football, these mobile quarterbacks like Trey Lance are just fantasy cheat codes. And it's just been great to see the fantasy performance from this young rookie. Maybe this leads to Kyle Shanahan thinking about, do I rethink about the depth charts associated with the quarterback position? Is Jimmy Garoppolo going to be out another week, which gives Trey Lance another sort of extended look, a true extended look with the offense sort of centered around him in terms of game script? I'm really excited about Trey Lance, and let's see what he ends up doing for Half Chubb's roster. Certainly is going to be a boon to John's roster for this season, especially if he's able to start getting these extended looks and become the official starter this early in the season, which was not expected. I'm going to go over to another quarterback on a different team now, and I'm going to bring up Sam Darnold. He was the QB2 in all of NFL in week 4. But I think what we're seeing is this pattern of ground usage by Sam Darnold. He's now leading the NFL in total rushing touchdowns in the entire league. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing Sam Darnold sort of take off after the injury to CMC, and we're not seeing the same usage that we're seeing, in Chuba Hubbard that CMC was getting. And I think Sam Darnold's been able to take a lot of these sort of rushing touchdowns because of that. Now, obviously, the question is, what happens when CMC is back? But Sam Darnold, obviously, right now in our league is just sort of sitting on the bench. I believe he's on Brandon's roster. So we'll see when Brandon's able to sort of have the nerves able to start him. But to be fair, that's probably the only team that will never make a start, given how strong Brandon's quarterback core is between Josh Allen and Dak Prescott. I'm going to stay young here, and I'm going to talk about Kenneth Gainwell gaining momentum. He's starting to steal touches away from Miles Sanders. This kid's a 5th round draft pick, and on draft day, people thought he slid quite far. A lot of teams were surprised he went back of the draft. But this 5th round draft pick rookie looks like he's taking this full share of passing plays, with Sanders decreasing touches in back-to-back weeks. And frankly, he just looks better out there. That said, Miles Sanders, young, I believe 3rd year, and has shown flashes that he's a high productive player. So until the Eagles are able to figure out their backfield and how the touches are going to be sort of split up, for as long as these two are running by true committees, which is what it's looking like right now, it's going to be a high ceiling caps across the board for both Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell going forward. Obviously, if an injury is to arise to either of them, the other healthy player should now be a must-start sort of going forward in fantasy of all formats. Michael Carter, we talked about this in a couple videos ago. Michael Carter is a rookie that's on the Jets, late round draft pick, is currently on Yves' roster at Cup to Canada. But after first few weeks of slowly gaining more touches and snaps in the backfield for the Jets, he looks like he's very close to becoming the true lead back for the Jets offense at large. His touches, like I mentioned, as well as snap counts, has crept up each week. And saw Carter seeing over 50% of the snaps in week 4 compared to just 25 in week 1. And I have a bunch of sort of the other names in this section for this highlights. I'm going to call it sort of the get right games. I think week 4 was filled with a lot of these players that were maybe coming with high expectations that weren't necessarily able to perform yet, or have had some disappointing weeks. And for me, those players are going to be Corey Davis, Saquon, Jonathan Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Dak Prescott. So starting with Corey Davis, he breaks the 100 yards for the first time this season, and the Jets offense looked a little bit back on track, similar to their week 1 outing. So now we're 4 weeks in. The Jets offense has looked great in week 1 and week 4, looked horrendous in week 2 and week 3. I'm curious what that week 5 and on is going to look like, and certainly with Zach Wilson, a rookie quarterback, maybe potentially learning. He's certainly hopefully not going to get worse as the season progresses, as he gets more experience. What does that mean for the Jets offense, and what's that mean for their receiver 1 in Corey Davis going forward? But that revenge game against the Tennessee Titans, you knew that Corey Davis was going to be having a big game. It was great to see Corey Davis sort of break out the week 4 game. Saquon, I keep mentioning him. I think I mentioned him as a highlight in week 2 and week 3, and certainly in week 4. Saquon continues to get increased usage, and he looks like every part to Saquon that we saw in his rookie year and his healthy games of his sophomore season, scoring 27.1 points for week 4. Me personally, I got Saquon Barkley ranked as RB4 for the rest of the season, and certainly within dynasty formats, this guy's going to be as valuable as any running back right now. I'm going to bring up Jonathan Taylor. I think that Miami run defense is honestly a get-right game for every running back in our league right now. So it was good to see Jonathan Taylor get some usage. It was also great to see Nyheim Hines getting much less usage. I'm not necessarily concerned about Marlon Mack getting into touches, because I think there was a agreement that the Indianapolis Colts has had with Mack, and that they're going to try to feature him a little bit so that they can get a trade done for him to get onto another roster. Clyde Edwards-Helaire obviously had a good week last week, so it's hard to really call week 4 the get-right game for him. But for me, I felt like this was the actual first good-looking game for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He looked every part. If he can keep this up, type of play and how he looked on the field, then he warrants that 3rd-round draft capital that Brandon utilized to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He just looks good. The only concern, obviously, is Darrell Williams continues to poach those goal line rushes. So we'll see how that sort of further develops, and perhaps if CEH is able to get more trust from the offense, from Pat, from the coach, and Andy Reid, perhaps he's going to be able to start drawing some of those goal line rushes away and back from Darrell Williams as well. I'm also going to mention Dak Prescott because he didn't necessarily look bad in week 3, but fantasy purposes was horrid for him. So highly efficient 4 passing touchdowns on just 22 attempts. It's interesting that Dallas is clearly obviously featuring the running game much more for Zeke and Pollard. And in terms of the limited passing attempts that's happened as a result of that, it's also interesting to see Dallas featuring Dalton Schultz in back-to-back weeks. And he's been the largest recipient of this sort of the new offense. I got Dalton Schultz. He's currently ranked as the 3rd tight end for the season in terms of the fantasy output so far. But Dak Prescott obviously performed. It was great to see that he can still get these efficient high touchdown usage outings, even with limited throwing attempts. Highly skilled, highly talented. He's got a lot of offense on that roster, including the receiver core and including Dalton Schultz. That seems like a new up-and-comer. But it's going to be good to keep an eye out on the type of sort of offense that Dallas continues to sort of feature as they get further into the season. All right, so that's going to bring me into sort of the next section of fantasy notables, which is more so on the notable sort of negatives. I'll start with probably the biggest injury for the season, or for week 4, which is David Montgomery. The report that came out yesterday looks like he's going to be out 4 to 5 weeks. Thankfully, they're saying that he's missed some structural damage and there isn't anything severe or major. So I think probably the Bears are going to be taking a cautious approach in bringing him back, thus the 4 to 5 week window in returning. And obviously this leads to the biggest waiver wire of week 4 in Damian Williams, and where the Washington Fantasy Football Team bid $80 to acquire, which I think is a reasonable get, especially for a contender tier like the Fantasy Football Team. The Washington Fantasy Football Team, to be able to acquire a player to really bolster up the midseason play for a contender like his roster right now. I'm going to talk about Myles Gaskin. I mean, where do you go? I mean, I think, coming into the season, it was talk of being a 3-down back, but he all but saw his entire usage disappear into thin air after getting a season-high 13 carries in week 3. And he also got no passing usage at all. I don't know why, the Miami sort of offense has all of a sudden lost trust in Myles Gaskin out of nowhere. It's not like he was looking bad. He certainly is still the most talented. He looks like the most talented running back by a mile on that Miami offense backfield. But it'll be interesting. Like, does Myles Gaskin just disappear completely? Or is he going to sort of revert back to something, or does something happen? Who knows? I think week 5 and week 6 will probably tell us a better story of what to expect for the rest of the season. Staying on running backs, Ty'Son Williams was a healthy scratch. I think, it was a healthy scratch with the Ravens giving room for Le'Veon in his first action since 2 seasons ago with the Chiefs. Latavius Murray obviously took the lead back position. Ty'Son was also the most dropped player across fantasy this week. Me, as the owner of Ty'Son Williams, I'm still holding out hope that he will end up cementing the Ravens lead back position as the season progresses, because I still do believe that Tyson is probably the most talented running back out of that committee right now. Last player I'll mention, and again, staying on the topic of running backs, is going to be Chris Carson. His snap share as well as usage really severely decreased over time. And I think it's at a rate where you can't necessarily say that it was because the team wanted to give Chris Carson rest. He still looked fresh, so too early to tell anything that's going to be happening with Chris Carson. But it's going to be interesting. Does Chris Carson really sort of go back? Do they not use him? Is Chris Carson actually going through what Zeke was going through in week 2 and week 3 as well? So another player to sort of look after as the season progresses. All right, so that brings us into that the section, which is the matchup recap, which is what you're all here for. As I mentioned, we've got 10 more games left. And remember what we are playing for this season, gentlemen. The trophy, of course. And unique for our inaugural season, our own custom-made fantasy championship ring with bling. And no guarantees that this ring continues every season, because I'm paying for this out of my own pocket. But just remember what you're playing for, gentlemen, so that you guys can start building for the future, or let me build for the future, and you guys can just build for this season. All right, so I'm going to start out with my commissioner game of the week in matchup 1, Bills Mafia versus the Washington Fantasy Football Team. This is hilarious. I actually forgot to change the scoring for the Washington Fantasy Football Team. So ignore the highlights of who got the win here. Actually, Bills Mafia with the stunning upset takes the close win here with Mike Williams falling back down to earth and unable to close just a 6-point gap heading into that Monday Night Football game. So Sleeper app had the Washington Fantasy Football Team has a 90% probability to win with Mike Williams, who is fantasy's number 2 wide receiver heading into that Week 4 game. And really, even within that first few drives of that Monday night game, it was concerning to see Mike Williams just not getting a single target on offense. And all that end zone passing looks actually went to a bigger body in Jared Cook. And also, obviously, with Austin Eckler converting a lot of the red zone opportunity, both on ground and air. So this was my commissioner game of the week pick, because not necessarily because of how upset of a victory it was, or how exciting it was that it came to the last minute and that last drive until that pick that Derek Carr ended up throwing, and with Austin Eckler running it for a touchdown, because a single touchdown would have done it. But it's actually because of the league-wide ramifications this matchup now creates for both of these teams to an extent, but certainly for Bills Mafia, as he now sits at 2-2 and not 1-3. So even though he traded Calvin Ridley away, Ridley wasn't necessarily causing wins for Bills Mafia today in the young season, and he's also got plenty of depth to be able to move up Mike Evans to the wide receiver 2 position, and he's got depth to be able to find performance at the flex spot out of his bench as well. So Brandon was heading into this week with the full build for the future mode in his mind, but I think this buys Brandon another 3 weeks to see what he decides to do for the rest of the season. That said, the next 3 matchups, Brandon will likely need to find a way to go 2-1 to sort of stay within that range. And certainly if he goes 0-3, the season's done. 1-2 might be hard, because then he's at the middle of the league. So I think he needs to go find a way to go 2-1. He's obviously got an easy matchup this week in week 5 against me. But after that, it's tough pickings as he faces our league's contenders in Brady's Third Dynasty and Cup to Canada in back-to-back weeks. Okay, so on Adam, I think, Adam had that disappointing week with Mike Williams, but I think Adam's team can still continue to put up these high floor type scoring outputs with his roster. He's the only team that has yet to score below 130 points in our league week to week, even with this donut of a play by Mike Williams. Obviously, his weakness at tight end has been addressed in previous videos, but with how thin tight ends are, even if Adam is able to only get the continuous sort of 6 to 8, 10 points from Adam Pitts, I think he should be able to stream in, or Kyle Pitts, I think he should be able to stream in players on his bench at the flex positions, given his depth in players like Antonio Brown, Zach Moss, who looks good, is getting a lot of the goal line touches and having decent sort of high fantasy scoring outputs, and Laviska Shenault, especially given the season-ending injury to DJ Shark on that Jags offense. So we'll see what this means for our power rankings heading into week 5. But I'm going to move over to matchup 2 between Cup to Canada and Chota. A great output by Cup to Canada. So Yves came into this week telling me that he's going to win, go on a 5-game winning streak. And who am I to judge after a performance like what he had in this week? I think Cup to Canada finally got a good performance at the QB2 position, which, to be fair, the first 3 weeks was not indicative of what he was going to get because of the weird in-game injuries and all the things that we've mentioned in previous videos. So obviously, Taylor Heinicke ended up performing like a QB1, so we can't necessarily expect that, but still, it sort of shows if he's able to stream in a replacement value player at the QB2 position, it just shows you how strong his roster is. And especially given the potential league-winning type of player waiver pickup that I mentioned earlier in Cordero Patterson, Yves is now back to 2-2 and 500 for the season. And I'd really put him as the strongest out of all the 2-2 teams in the league, or certainly between him and Adam for that tier. Over to Chota, after winning 2 straight and seeing his power rankings climb, Chota suffers a loss, bringing him back to 500 for the season. I do think he should be able to continue improving on his record. However, given his elite given receivers and the depth that he has there, but I think a gaping hole at the RB2 with Gassens now disappearing, and I don't necessarily see any obvious players on his bench who can help step up. I really look at it as his bench, and I haven't seen that many donuts sitting on a bench on a roster before. So I think Chota will need to make a roster change or another move to try to fill that gap. But I know that Chota isn't necessarily stressing out or sweating out. Again, he's gone 2-1 in the last 3 weeks after starting out probably the weakest roster in week 1 and the trades that he had made in week 2. So remember, though, that Chota is all in on the short term and the midterm as he traded away his first 2 picks for the next 2 seasons. So I'm very curious to see what kind of trades will be made as we progress towards sort of the mid-season in the coming weeks. Moving over to matchup 3, we got Brady's third dynasty versus Ben. I was going to call this the nameless matchup, but thank you for deciding on your name, Ryan, and I hope you had an awesome time on your honeymoon. I'm looking forward to going on my own honeymoon starting next month, so I appreciate you taking time and doing that. And for Ben, I'm not going to shit on Ben for not naming his team to date, as he has said that his no name was a good luck charm that took him to 3-0 to start the season. But Ben, now that you have come back down to earth to mortal status after suffering your first defeat, Ben, please name your team. So I'll start with Ben on the matchup recap. A bad overall scoring output coming down from being the league leader in week 3. And I think a large reason was that Cooper Kupp showed us that he's also just a mortal human being. Still put up a decent near 9-point outing, but I mean, that's disappointing relatively, very disappointing relatively, if you compare it to the fact that he hasn't scored below 20 points in the first 3 weeks of the season. So this now puts Ben at 3-1, and I think Ben still got a lot of decisions to make, right? Sitting at 3-1, it's obvious that you should go for it, but do you go for it this season, or do you try to build for the future? Obviously, Ben still got all of his picks, and he's obviously got a lot of great high-end players, so assets required to go either way in his direction are certainly there for him to make. But I do have a hard time putting Ben in a contender tier, but he's also too good right now to be placed at anywhere near the bottom. So it just puts it into that category, which is the worst thing I think it can be in Dynasty formats, which is to be in the middle. So I am really curious to see what Ben does. Ben, have a good time in Germany, and we'll see you next week. And I'm looking forward to seeing whatever moves you end up making. All right, so over to our newest named team, over to Brady's third dynasty. Another solid outing. Even with Dalvin Cook being limited coming back from injury, so scoring less than 10 points, still gets the win here. It's back-to-back weeks for Antonio Gibson putting up solid numbers, and what you can't count on Tyreek Hill putting up 40-plus points every single week, the rest of his roster just continues to perform to expectations, at least as a group. And similar to the Washington Fantasy Football Team, I think this kind of output from the Brady's third dynasty is something that represents his expected scoring week in and week out. So along with Washington Fantasy Football Team and Brady's third dynasty, they are the only 2 teams in our league to have yet scored below 130 for the entire season to date. All right, I'm going to go over to the last matchup between Trust the Process and Half Chubb, as Commissioner Brandon called it, the Tankers matchup. What do you know? As predicted by Commissioner Brandon, Half Chub notches his first victory of the season in a dominant league record-setting week, scoring over 170 points. Actually, I think Brandon took that. So this is an old script, which I thought Half Chub had a chance to score 180 points. But regardless, gets the second highest points in the league, which is great performance coming from a winless team heading into week 4. And really, it was behind some awesome performances behind DJ Moore, which probably deserved a shout out in the Get Right games just because he hasn't been struggling per se, but he finally gets this breakout performance that a lot of people expected out of DJ Moore. Deebo Samuel's on his roster, Corey Davis. So really 3 players that really stepped up and made a whole difference for Half Chub in week 4. This now puts Half Chub at 1-3 with a reloaded roster in bringing in Calvin Ridley and Derek Carr, who statistically is a substantial upgrade to John's previous QB2 position in Baker Mayfield. So I think waiver pickup of also Dalton Schultz also looks promising as a potential season-long upgrade at the tight end position, given that he's got Higbee and Tonyan. So perhaps if Dalton Schultz is able to continue to get his outing like he's gotten over the last 2, this is a needle mover for John going forward for the rest of the season. So while Full Chub's roster may not be top heavy, it's certainly strong and it's at least respectable at every single position, certainly within the top 5, top 4. So perhaps John sees the window for the playoff run and playoff push this season as he traded away a first-round pick to get Calvin Ridley. With 10 games to go, assuming that the 7-7 record as the cutoff sort of line for playoff seeding, John certainly has the firepower to finish out the season going 6-4. So over to trust the process. It was the worst output for the young season for my team behind obviously injuries that happened, heading into the game in Gronk and in-game in Teddy Bridgewater, along with sort of subpar performance in players I need outputs from to have a chance to sneak out some wins in DeAndre Swift, Chris Godwin, CeeDee Lamb, all disappointed here. And with potential multi-week absences ahead for Gronkowski due to his rib injury, the rest of the season play for me is starting to look a little bleak. That said, from week 1, the plan was to build for the future, and sitting at 1-3, that's, I guess, what's expected. But obviously, every loss still stings. So for as long as there are first-round picks out there owned by other managers, my work is not complete. I still got major pieces that can be included in trades, so I'm looking to forward to the mid-season when the playoff seeding gets much more competitive, where managers will commit to going for it. All right. So that does it for our week 4 recap. I'm looking forward to the power rankings coming out tomorrow. Good luck in week 5, boys, and congrats to Commissioner Brandon keeping his winning record for the season going 2-2 for week 4. Look forward to the power ranking videos coming out later today. See you Thursday, Sunday, Monday. Peace.